So hello again. Maybe maybe you saw the channel and think, oh no, this dude doesn't know anything I'll be doing, but I do know. The thing I know about is not mainly VTubing as a whole because I have like no personality and stuff, but what I do know is branding. So welcome to this branding class for VTuber and digital content creators. So let's begin, shall we? First we have our goals. Our goals are to understand VTuber branding, learn visual identity systems, and design a VTuber brand concept. So what makes VTubers different from a regular streamer? And it's the fact that you get a character, a performance, and a brand all in one. And because of this, visual identity with them must be instantly recognizable. For example, you have some of Hololife's most recognizable figures. Some are graduated and some are not. But you surely recognize those people if you are here. Now, you immediately recognize who these people are, what personality do they have, and their own identity and color scheme just by looking at them. So let's continue. The thing I want you to recognize from this image is to identify that each one of them have a distinct color palette and each one of them has a different theme and defined personality cues. The other thing you can immediately see by looking at them is their personality and content style. Mostly if someone sees a thumbnail from a VTuber for 2 seconds, the thing that she'll recognize is what I just told you. Again, the color palette, the personality, and content style. Maybe then don't consciously look and say, oh, this color is this must be this character. But like it's an unconscious association with the color, the character, the way they look, the content. It's a whole brand identity. So let's continue. What are those? Those are the 3 pillars of VTuber branding. First, you have character identity, which is probably the most important thing and the distinctive characteristic of this style of content creation. Then we have visual identity and content identity. So let's explain a bit of character identity. Character identity means all about the fictional persona, including the lore, personality, and archetype. The visual identity is the logo, color palette, typography, and character silhouette. All of the visual part, I say there, is kind of an obvious thing if you think a bit about it, but I still explain it regardless. Then we have the content identity, which is the stuff you do itself, like the stream, the way you talk, the music, the content itself. So let's profundize a little bit. So the character identity, the lore and archetype. In this example, we have a very recognizable figure in Ogami Gorone. We have the lore, which is, here it says, a dog from a bakery in the city. She likes to play games during her free time while watching. Then we have her personality, which is in the quote and in the post and in the design is reflected there. Then the audience appeal, which is more implicit, but everything cooperates to that. It's mostly about the target audience. So people who go for this specific VTuber prefer something more cutesy, more like she acts like in a dumb way, like a dog would. Like, not in a despective way, but that's the character she plays. Unlike this person who wants to express a more, like Watson for example, who wants to express a more smart persona, more. So let's continue. Archetype examples. So archetypes are, let's say, the job your character has or the race, the type of character. For example, let's go back here. Here we have the archetype is a dog. Here the archetype is a bunny girl. Here the archetype is a detective. And here the archetype is a shark girl. In my example, I'm just a demon. This is like an important part because it's part of your gimmick. The whole VTuber thing is part of making, like having your own gimmick and stuff. This thing as a whole is a gimmick for content creation and also a little tool to further express yourself. It's all about self-expression. So that's why this whole thing is very tied to branding and visual design and all of that. Now let's go with visual identity. Here we have a Gargura, one of the most recognizable figures. In this case, we have logo design like the word mark, and sometimes it's a mascot logo or an emblem, but what you want to see with the logo is that it surely reflects the personality of the character a lot. Mostly in the terms of logo design with VTubers, it takes like a second plane. We're gonna talk more about it later. Then we have the color palette, which is probably one of the most important parts and the one that makes everything be cohesive together, as you've seen with this presentation so far. Then we have typography, which is all of the written stuff. And finally the character silhouette, which is also very important. But if you're just starting, you don't have to worry a lot about character silhouette, because you usually cannot afford a proper model. Shut the fuck up, stupid ass dog. So you can probably not afford character silhouettes if you're a starting VTuber like me. As this, for example, I'm using a generic ass model. So it's always gonna be like this weird phallic figure. But I compensate with the strong expression in the terms of typography, logo design, and color palette. A lot of people hate this color palette. Why? I don't know. It technically combines, but you know. Now, as for logos, usually VTuber logos are a generic typeface related with the character personality and elements present in the model. And yes, it can be so much better. Like you can make it like a proper emblem, you know. But usually people will like stay with just a bit of a deep typography that reflects your character, then a few details present in the model. Like for example, here we have shark elements that, and then we see it like reflected in the character and such. So yes, it takes like a second plane, but you know, don't scratch your head too much with the logo. It's probably the last thing you wanna do in the whole design thing. Not that it's less important, but it's that it has a lower priority, you know? In the specific context of VTuber, logo typically plays a secondary role, while the character itself functions as the primary focal point of the brand identity. So that's why you don't have to worry a lot about the logo. You can really do something like this in 5 minutes with a generator or something, or ask someone. It's really a cheap commission, this thing. It's a low cost thing, and you really don't place it anywhere outside of like some specific stuff like the intro screen, the end screen, I don't know, some legal document. So here's the color palette. Ideally you want, for example, a primary color, which is the one that takes most of the screen, most of the scheme, then a secondary color that complements with it, that, like for example here I'm using purple, then dark purple, then an accent color, which is the one that makes other stuff stand out, and usually it's like a complementary one in the color wheel. Then a neutral color that's anything grayscale. Anything grayscale works for your neutral color. So here's a little color theory cheat sheet. And the tones means like the difference in the wheel. Like for example, this is a tone, this is another tone, this is another tone. The brightness is a different thing. For example, here the primary color is one color, like purple. Then the secondary color is the same tone but a different brightness, a different gamma. As for the saturation, it's like the intensity of the color, like a flashing red or like a pastel red, you know the difference. So here for example, in this screenshot I used from her debut, there's the primary color, which is blue, which is present in the whole thing, and the secondary color, which is present in the text, like in some details in the clothes, the mascot there. Then the accent color, which is not very noticeable, but it's in example, as an example in the little gold thing. Then the neutral color, which should be, it's not very noticeable because it combines with anything, but you can see it in her hair, for example, in the text box in the presentation. And now she's using a split complementary color palette, which is a method here that's used to combine colors. Any one of these things will make a color combine. You can use, for example, this range will combine like with analogous. You can use like monochromatic, where you only change like the intensity of the color and the tone, but never change the tone. Complementary, when you use one color that's on the opposite of the palette. The split complementary, which is the same, but you just split it like that. Then a triad, which is pretty much a triangle, and tetradic, which is a square if you think about it, or a cross. Having this in mind, you can pretty much pick any primary color at the time of making a color palette. You can pick any color you want. Then at the time to use a secondary color, ideally you want to use like something that's in the same range of tones, and your accent color that's usually a complementary across, and your neutral color that's anything just grayscale. As for tones are not as strict. It's a color range. So for example, here in the little clouds behind, I'm using like pink instead of purple, and it will still combine because it's still kind of across the color green. Typography. Typography is very important. Usually people don't notice it a lot, but it's a crucial part of the identity. One of the main ways of communication visually is through text. And if you can choose a text style that fits you, you can communicate your personality way better. But that's the main reason behind why you just don't underestimate the power of typography. For example, here's what I chose for this. We have a logo font, which is the one obviously I use in my logo, and I was in need of something like big elements. Like for example, you have the stream buttons below. Those are also elements that they require usually a decorative font, optionally, but they look so much better with a decorative font. Decorative fonts are made for big titles and not really for bodies of text. So you really don't want to use your logo font for anything else than the logo. It's unique and it's an emblem of your brand. So in this case, I got a secondary decorative font that fits for the big fancy titles and elements, which is funky bubble graffiti font. So that way, use a big font, a decorative font, without using the logo font, because you really don't want to touch the logo font and leave it only for the logo. Now, as for the bodies of text, I choose pretty much any font that's like more readable and it's round, representing more cohesion with the rest of the brand image, like same shape language and stuff. And I did not choose a round font for the logo, so it makes kind of a contrast, that's my idea. Now, here we have those screenshots. Why did Hololive use that font only in her presentation? First off, it's a special occasion and she was obviously presenting herself. Second, it's a very used font in Japan for some reason. I don't know why. Third, console is a familiar font. It's present in any Windows system operation thing. And it comes like as a default font in the notepad thing from Windows. So if you think about the target audience of this person, like for example people from 70 to 30-year-olds who are watching on their computers, they obviously know this font, they're familiar with this font, so unconsciously they see something familiar in the stream and immediately make like some sort of connection, like this is like a warm from to say. For example, Comic Sans is like the most hated font. It's the worst font to use in any formal capacity, but it's also one of the most known fonts. It's one of the most visually recognizable fonts, and that's why sometimes, if the case comes to it, you can use fonts such as this or Comic Sans in a way that's used to connect with people, in my opinion. So say you make a meme with Comic Sans and everyone say, oh look, it's Comic Sans, or I don't know, fucking Sans Undertale or some shit. Now the other fonts are round cutesy fonts that are consistent with the shape language as seen here in the silhouette. And here we have the difference between serif and sans serif. Serif is when they have a little tail thing at the end of the type. So what I want you to understand is that the brand image as a whole has to be cohesive. There has to be a connection between the font, the shapes in the background, the shapes in your character, the shapes in your logo, and the shapes in your elements. Everything has to be cohesive. That's why I call this thing like glue. For example, here we have this shitty character I downloaded from Pinterest, which is AI made because her hand kind of merges with her dress. Here you can see the character has a more elegant font, like a more elegant dress. So for that we use like a more elegant font, like a serif. This is a use case for a serif font, as you can see there. I want you to understand, it's not like you go and use the generic VTuber font, but your font has to go with your brand image present in your character and present in everything. Now here's the rest of the stream graphic elements. There's stuff like HUDs, frames, chatbox, PFP, banners. In my case, I don't use any frames or chatboxes, I use default shit because I'm a lazy fuck, but you can still make use of this. The other thing you have to have in mind is that it has to be cohesive, it has to look good. And to make stuff look good, it has to be cohesive. It's kind of a vicious cycle, you know? The color palette plays a big role in the terms of cohesion in this thing. So, and also shapes. Shapes also play a big role in the terms of cohesion. Think of it as puzzle pieces or chains or getting stuff together with glue. The glue is your color palette. So here's some general design tips. You wanna avoid like too much stuff. People are kind of brainwashed by TikTok and all that shit, so you have to keep stuff simple and easy to read. Also, your overlays shouldn't get all over the place and should support your avatar instead of like containing it. Shit, I left a square there. Fucking forgot to delete the square. That's funny. As you can see, even the teacher makes mistakes. Regardless, here you can see a few thumbnails in a very small size. So the thing about thumbnails is that they must be readable at small sizes and have clear context and large text. Now, how is the contrast achievable here? For example, where the hell is my pencil? Over here, this one you have a clear contrast with the color yellow and the color blue. If we go back to the color palettes, the color yellow is found here and the color blue is found there, so there's a clear contrast in tone. Now, the other thing you wanna keep in mind is that there's multiple types of contrast. You can make contrast with color, with tone, with gamma. For example, with tones you can make contrast as seen in the color schemes right here. With brightness you can make contrast, like for example seen right here. Right here you have a strong, in those words over here, you have a strong brightness difference. Now, a saturation thing about saturation is that some people who don't know a lot about design will go with something flashy, like for example a Mr. Beast thumbnail. But the thing about oversaturation is that it expresses a feeling of cheapness, as if you were like making AI content. AI content tends to be very saturated for some reason, so you don't wanna crank it up 100% in terms of saturation. It's kind of synonymous with slop, not always. But you also wanna catch attention. That's why you also need a little bit, but not too much. Now, common branding mistakes are like making a color palette with way too many colors, an inconsistent theme, like having elements from one type of image and other elements from other ones. Is usually seen with like people who use templates for their buttons and stuff. Everything is complex logos because they're like not easy to read, and logos should be recognizable from a small size. And then there's like generic designs, which you know is like your, just Google VTuber logo and you will find 1,000 of them. But for generic design, it doesn't mean generic logo, it means generic everything. Everything as a whole is generic. And that's very easy to make if you don't take the time to make your own brand image, or if that you do it in a hurry. So before we finish, I want to go back here. VTuber logos are the most generic shit ever. You really, again, don't want to think too much about it. But also, in the case you want to dedicate time to it, you want to make something that's not seen everywhere, because everyone just grabs a kind of random kawaii type font, write their character name, then put the stuff all over it. If you want to make something unique, you have to be outside of the box and make something that makes you recognizable. Like, think of it as a business logo. Like, you want to have a name and a very recognizable figure, and that's it. Because this is like way too much stuff and you can pretty much confuse them with one another. They do reflect their own image, yes, but they're not recognizable. VTuber recognition not only comes from the logo but comes from the graphic image as a whole. So, now you should know the basics to VTuber branding, hopefully, if I didn't screw up this class. And now let's give some closure, shall we? So, good branding helps audiences recognize a creator instantly, remember them across platforms, connect emotionally with the character, and most successful VTubers combine those three elements, like the pillars. I think the pillars are the most important thing to remember because it's like the core thing of a VTuber. With the first thing over here, this thing, those are like your objectives. You wanna make this, you wanna be recognized as a creator instantly, you wanna be remembered across platforms, and emotionally connect with the character you're representing. Yes, I'm talking to you, actor behind the VTuber. Here's a little question in the bottom part that says, if 100 VTubers launch tomorrow with similar avatars, what will make you stand out? And that's the main question I want you to answer at the time of doing a brand image for your character. I like to think about it as creating a world for your character to live in, because, for example, I, Kimu, don't exist outside of this screen, of this space that was created specifically for me. And that's the thing I want you to understand at the moment of creating this sort of stuff. So mainly videoing is, sure, you can go like simply just a random avatar and just doing your stuff, but if you want to perfect the thing you like, I think it's like crucial you learn at least the basics of branding. So yeah, this was the test run of this class. I'm gonna put it through feedback shit, and that's